That's what it takes for Ukraine to win, according to their own president. So what happens if a small-yield nuclear weapon goes off in Kiev that was smuggled there in a briefcase through Belarus?
Putin has threatened nuclear missiles. So are you totally discounting that?
I don't totally discount the use of nuclear weapons. I will say that the probability of a nuclear weapon going off in the United States is extremely small.
Mm-hmm.
The probability of a nuclear weapon going off in a NATO country is extremely small. It doesn't make any sense for Putin to use a nuclear warhead in a country that guarantees war with the United States, that guarantees retaliation with the United States. That doesn't make sense. But it's not nearly so cut and dry, right? People think, again, thanks to the oversimplification of media, we think that Russia's going to launch some nuclear weapon that hits New York. That's not how wars are fought. Wars are fought with covert action and with plausible deniability. So what happens if a small-yield nuclear weapon goes off in Kiev that was smuggled there in a briefcase through Belarus? That's a much more likely outcome. Who takes responsibility for that? Who does NATO hold accountable for that?
Yeah.
Right? The only facts, the only evidence you would have are a blast in Kiev, no missile, no source that you know of where it was deployed from, and maybe you can track it back to crossing the border from Belarus, but Belarus isn't at war with Ukraine. Belarus is a proxy for Russia, but you can't hold Putin responsible for what Belarus does. You have to hold Lukashenko responsible for what Belarus does. But who holds him responsible? It's not a NATO country. So does NATO go to war with Belarus? You see how messy that would get?
Mm-hmm.
That's how this kind of conflict actually happens. You want there to be so much confusion that people can't plan their response. One of the benefits that autocracies have over democracies, China, Russia being autocracies, Syria, Iran being autocracies, is they don't have to worry about bureaucratic gridlock. The United States, on its own, has bureaucratic gridlock all the time. NATO is a conglomerate of bureaucracies. It's a bureaucracy of bureaucracies. So imagine the gridlock that they have to deal with. Part of the reason the United States is the one funding Ukraine is because NATO can't make a decision. They can't make a decision over 6 months, let alone 6 hours, right? At least the president can pass an executive order and everybody moves forward. So autocracies are constantly playing against that democratic weakness of bureaucracy. So a pocket nuke goes off in Kiev, or a pocket nuke goes off in the Donbas region, and it's smuggled through Romania, or it's smuggled through Moldova, or it's smuggled through Belarus. Who's held responsible for that? What's the global response to that? NATO is gridlocked. The United States is putting pressure on NATO to come to a certain conclusion, but NATO doesn't want to come to that conclusion because then they look like they're being bullied by the United States. In the meantime, you still have a nuke that just went off in Ukraine. That is absolutely within the realm of plausibility. But what's the benefit? Unless it's a city like Kiev, unless it takes out the entire presidential core or the entire leadership core, it doesn't really benefit Russia. And that's what if Russia's going to use a nuke, if they're going to use a nuke overtly or covertly, they want to use it in a way that brings a very specific benefit to them.
For anybody who's thinking, oh, this is a conspiracy, bringing a nuke in a briefcase, I'd like to remind you that Andy was on the nuclear program for the U.S. Air Force. So I think he's a pretty credible source. But so
nuclear missiles are very public things. Everybody sees the launch. Everybody sees the reentry. It's all documented by satellites. It's a very public thing.
Good. If we do lose this, if Ukraine loses, which it sounds like you're damn near certain that they will, what does it look like for the U.S.? What does it look like for the rebuild?
So I want to define win and loss to start, right? Because Zelensky has made his criteria for winning to be so unstatesmanlike, he's basically said that the definition for Ukraine to win is the full reinstatement of all territories going back to prior to the invasion of Crimea. That's what it takes for Ukraine to win, according to their own president. If he changes his stance on that, then that in and of itself shows that they've lost, right? So that's such an impossible outcome. That's why I feel like the probability of Ukraine winning, according to their own definition of winning, I am damn near certain they're not going to get that.
Yeah.
They will most likely get some kind of ceasefire where they are given the opportunity to acquiesce to the vote of Eastern Ukraine to join Russia, and there'll be some kind of, dividing line, much like we see in between North and South Korea. That's what the world wants, but that may not be what Zelensky wants. So what does it look like after that? It looks like if that ceasefire happens and it's driven by NATO or it's driven by the United States, then it looks like democracy wins. If that ceasefire happens and it's driven by China or it's driven by Russia or it's driven by some ally that we haven't even heard of those two, like Turkey, then it looks like democracy is weak, right? So if conflict continues, it looks like democracy is strong. If conflict ends, there's a split decision right now, right? And that's a big reason why the United States is happy to keep funding a war. It's also a big reason why NATO is so uncomfortable with continuing war. Because NATO does not want Russia, their neighbor, they don't want Russia to go insane, get out of control, or be provoked into launching some sort of counteroffensive into a NATO country. Even if Russia gets destroyed, France, Germany, Poland, they don't want a nuclear weapon going off in their country. That is a devastating catastrophe for any government to have so poorly executed support for a proxy war that they end up being the target of a retaliatory strike. Think about that. That's the end of not just political careers. That's the entire just destruction through a nuclear weapon of a large city. So whenever the president or the chancellor of Germany or France has to consider what they're going to do next, they always have to weigh that in their mind. They always have to be thinking, yeah, Russia might be destroyed, and so is Paris. Russia might be destroyed, but so is Munich. In the United States, we don't have to worry about that. In the United States, we might be like, Russia's destroyed. That's awesome. Paris took a bomb. That sucks. Americans are still safe. High five. Right? That's how we think here. That's how we have to think here. If we're really thinking about a world that is led by the United States as their economic superpower, that's how we think.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.